They say you never really know the extent of a person's pain until you are faced with the same situation as them. Nobody would relate that statement as much as Gary Jennings did. He was a bully to everyone, but especially to his brother, Jason. And it did not just start one day. It started in bits and pieces, through constant practice. One day, when he was 10 and his brother was 7, he stepped on his brother's pet rabbit. When his brother found out that his rabbit was dead and that Gary stepped on it, he ran to their dad, who then beat up Gary. Gary ignored Jason for as long as he could after the incident. He was unhappy that his dad beat him up for merely stepping on an animal. People could cut him some slack and say that he was just a dumb kid who did not know that the rabbit was way more than an animal. It was an emotional connection to his brother. The rabbit was Jason's best friend, and he stepped on it with no remorse, and still felt right about what he did years later. But the same people who might have cut Gary some slack would regret doing that when they found out that even when he was a grown teenager, he still bullied his brother. It didn't help that Jason was an autistic child, had difficulties carrying out normal tasks, and needed a lot more help than other kids. But he refused to be homeschooled, so their dad still let him attend the same high school that Gary did. And every morning, while Gary got ready for school, their dad made breakfast and helped his 15-year-old younger brother get ready for school. Sometimes Jason found it difficult to sleep at night and was more grumpy in the mornings. So their dad left the breakfast making over to Gary and comforted an unsettled Jason in his bedroom. Sometimes, instead of going to Gary's baseball games, he stayed with Jason, who needed constant attention. From the onset, Gary did not like his brother. Then it became worse when his dad doted on his brother and hardly gave him the time of day. The situation worsened daily as their dad asked him to make breakfast while he got ready for school. It got worse when he was asked to help Jason navigate the school, and it got worse when he was asked to let Jason watch whatever he wanted to watch on the TV. And little by little, Gary's aversion towards his brother got intense. When their dad dropped them off at school, Gary saw it as his time to shine. His reign of terror began, and he went hard on his brother. His friends on the soccer team were bullies like him, and he let them bully his brother. Jason was shoved into lockers, water was poured on him in the hallway, and his books were hit out of his hands. At first, he told their dad about it, and their dad hit Gary whenever he bullied his brother. But after a while, Jason got tired of reporting. It did not change things, it did not help matters, and it only made things worse. Whenever their dad hit Gary, he would ignore Jason for a few days before he bounced back bigger, better, and with more bullying tricks up his sleeves. Because of his condition, Jason found it difficult to understand stuff, especially at school, and his social anxiety always hit the roof. His dad knew all that. He also knew that some nights when Jason found it hard to sleep and was tired the next morning, he would have preferred to be at home rather than being driven off to school, and he asked several times to homeschool him. But the boy wanted to be in regular school like every other person. He did not want to feel limited by his condition. He did not want to feel left out, and it would have been easier for him if his brother did not loathe him so much. When their dad was stumped with work, he asked Gary to help his brother out with his homework or any other studying that Jason needed help with, and Gary did. Only he did it the wrong way. He wrote wrong answers to Jason's homework 3 times before Jason realized that he did it on purpose. But he knew that if he told the truth to their dad, he would bear the brunt of the entire situation. So when their father asked his reason when he said he would rather wait for their father to finish with work and help him with his homework instead of letting Gary help him, he said it was nothing. Their dad suspected something, but he let it be. If only he knew that his elder son poured ice blocks down the shirt of his younger son in winter. If only he knew that whenever he was late from work, Jason was uncomfortable at home. Jason hated staying with his elder brother, and he was happy when Gary graduated high school and went off to college in a different state. Anyone who heard that Jason still went to regular school with his condition seemed impressed, and they said it was good that his brother was there to help him navigate the environment. And some of them even suggested that Jason could go off to college with his elder brother when he graduated high school. But Jason knew that he would rather chew all the jeans in every Forever 21 shop in the country than live in the same house as Gary again. So he was also happy when his brother was scouted during the college game and was eventually signed into the NFL. He was happy that his brother would only be over to their home during the holidays. It meant his brother would barely have any time to see him, talk more of the time to bully him, and Gary was happy as well. He loved playing basketball. It gave him peace and left him exhilarated at the same time. It was difficult to find something that served both purposes, but Gary did, and he was happy with his career. He made money from doing something that he liked, from something that made him happy, and he was also great at it. And in no time, he was the trendy thing in the sports world. He was on everyone's lips, and he was invited to a lot of interviews where he smiled, made jokes, and sounded extremely different from the boy who pushed his brother into lockers. However, a year into his glorious reign, many games later, and after signing 1 million autographs, he sustained an injury while playing. His team was playing in the tournament, and he was the shooting guard in the game. When his teammates passed the ball to him, he could easily have shot it into the hoop from the position he was in. But that was not Gary's style. Gary liked to make shots that made the news. And that was what he aimed for as he bounced the ball, dodged the weak attempts of the few opponents, and went to the hoop. But as he jumped to put the ball in the hoop, one of the opponents that he passed by with the ball jumped back at him from his side. It was obvious that the guy did not aim for the ball, but rather to push Gary back to the ground. And he succeeded. He pushed Gary straight to the ground, and his fall was so painful that even the spectators felt it. He hit his head on the field with a thud, and his arm was stuck in an unnatural position. The coach whistled loudly at the foul. The audience went wild with rage at the player who pushed Gary. The paramedics ran to him, and he let out an inhuman growl. The paramedics wheeled him away, and he never went back into the field of play. The painful thing was that the arm that was hurt was his shooting arm, and it was in such bad shape that he spent a long time in the hospital. The doctors did the best that they could to restore it to its normal shape, but the arm was badly hurt, and no matter what they did, it could not go back to its normal state. His tendon was badly hurt, and they patched it up, but they advised him to quit playing the game. They said he could burst up his hand any time, and that it was better he quit. But Gary was stubborn. He believed that he could give the arm some time to heal before he went back into the field, and he shared the idea with his coach. The man liked Gary. He was an excellent player, which sane coach wouldn't, but he also did not want to put the boy at risk. He also did not want to put an injured player in a match and put the entire team in danger of losing the game if the arm went bad during the game. The coach liked the boy, but he had to follow the advice of the medical practitioners, who said that it would be better off for everyone if Gary was not let back to play. Gary was pissed. He only had 1 year to be happy, then the stupid player snatched his happiness from him. And what did the player get in return? Only a suspension, a bad image, and hurtful messages from sports fans. Gary was pissed, but there was also nothing else that he could do, so he walked out and stayed back in his place. However, if there was one thing that Gary knew how to do, other than playing basketball and bullying his brother, it was reacting badly to tough situations. And that was what he did. He whiled his months away and burnt his money on alcohol and drugs. He rotated between detrimental emotions. One day he was angry, and the next day he was depressed. The next day he was extremely sad and cried in bed. And the day he heard the player who hit him was called back into the game, he lost it. He soaked up his body with alcohol until he couldn't think straight anymore, and he went on to the man's house with a knife. Anger was never a level-headed emotion, so when he broke the door and walked in to see the man at the dinner table with his pregnant wife and kid, he should have walked out. Instead, he pulled out the glittering blade at the man and stalked toward him in anger. The woman shrieked and her kid ran to her side, but he ignored them and walked to the athlete. The man backed up and put up his hands out to plead with Gary, but Gary slashed the man's palms. Before the man could even get over the pain of the first hurt, he slashed his stomach. But as he raised his hand to attack the man again, the wife smacked a tennis racket on his head with all the force she had, and he lost consciousness. When he woke up, he was in cuffs, and like a bad dream, he was sentenced to jail for trespassing and attempted murder. In jail, his emotional health had still not improved, but it became a second problem for him because his safety got the first position. He was roomed with 3 other guys, and he took the upper part of the bunk to a huge tattooed guy. The guy looked like the stereotypical definition of a convict, and if Gary had run into him outside of jail, he sure as hell would not have been involved with him. But in jail, they were cellmates, bunkmates, and Gary had no choice but to deal with him. Even at that, he tried to steer clear of the guy, Archer, but the guy did not give him the chance to. All his life, Gary was a bully. He constantly tormented his brother, bullied his classmates at school, and he bullied his weaker teammates. And some people could have said it was his karma that he was met with a bully in jail. Archer made his life a living hell. He was already in so much pain and regretted going after the basketballer in his home. He already regretted drowning himself in so much alcohol to the point that he could hardly think straight. He hated himself, but his bully did not care about it, and he beat Gary up at every chance he got. During meals, Archer spit in Gary's food or snatched his plate from his hands, and he could not report to the prison guards for the fear of what Archer would do when they were back in their cell. Then one night, as Gary slept on his bed, he felt a heavy slap on his back, and when he woke up with a start, he could see that Archer had hit him. The other cellmates were not in support of Archer bullying Gary, but they did not do anything. Archer had bullied them too when they first went into prison, and having someone else to distract him from them was a relief to them. Nobody wanted to be in Gary's shoes, so they said nothing. But the ironic thing about the whole situation was that Gary could not take it. He had spent his entire life being the bully, and he had no idea what being a victim felt like. When he was in the situation, he wore the same shoes as his brother and many other people that he had hurt. He could not bear it. It might have been that he was already in a very vulnerable state before he started being bullied, or it could have been that he wasn't as tough-skinned as he thought he was. Either way, he cried himself to sleep every night when he was bullied. And the night that he was woken up with a slap was not any different. He silently cried himself back to sleep and woke up the next day with a raging headache that only increased with the beating he later received from Archer when they were out in the courtyard. His lip was busted, his head hurt, and he was dejected. But all that was on his mind was his brother. He had been so bad to his brother through their childhood years and as they grew up. And in the beginning, when his brother ran off to their dad, he felt that he was overreacting because he knew that their father would pick his side. But when he was on the receiving end, he finally knew how painful bullying could be. And he could only imagine how hard it was on Jason, who had a disability. He could only imagine how hard it was on Jason, who was bullied by his brother. He could only imagine how bad Jason must have felt when he pushed ice blocks down his shirt, or shoved him into lockers, or wrote wrong answers to his homework. His regret ran higher than pain on his emotion scale at that point. His father was disappointed with him when he was sentenced, and had not gone over to visit him. Jason, too, hadn't. But the boy's stance was understandable. No one would want to go to jail to visit their convicted bully, so he could not just wait up for a visit from them to apologize. But he really wanted to apologize to his brother for all the pain that he had put him through. So he did the next thing that he thought of. He asked the prison guard for a pen and paper to write a letter to his brother. The guard gave him a pencil and a lined paper out of a notebook and watched him as he sat on the chair in the hall and wrote to his brother. Bearing out his pain and regret on the lined paper, Gary wrote, "Dear Jason, I know that you may be shocked when this letter reaches you, and I also know you may be angry towards me or even hate me, but please don't let that hate stop you from reading this letter. Everything I want to say can be put into one short sentence, and that is, I am sorry. But I also want to give you a reason why I was so hard on you, because it's the least that you deserve. I was jealous. That is the simple truth. Mom has always been out of the picture, and the only parent we had loved you more than anything else in the world. Dad did not care about me, and he never did, and he constantly hit me. But with you, I saw him be the sweet parent that he could never afford to be towards me, and I thought that if I hurt you, it would make you feel a little of the pain that I felt every day when Dad hurt me. And I know that this does not justify my behavior toward you, but it's the truth. Now I know what it feels like to be in your shoes, and I am sorry for ever putting you in that position. I am so sorry that I was never the brother that you deserved. I am sorry for all the pain I caused you. Please find a space in that big heart of yours to forgive me. And I also understand if you cannot forgive me today or ever. I know I was pretty hard on you. I just want you to know that I am truly sorry, and I regret ever hurting you. Sincerely." Charlotte reached the office late, and her table was already full of many files to go through. She was elegantly dressed in a three-piece brown suit, and red lipstick made her face look younger and prettier. She was 36 years old and owned a steadily growing business. Her parents passed away 2 years ago, and she separated from her toxic husband just a year ago. Since then, she has lived alone and has been single. She did not think about getting married again because of her traumatic experience. As Charlotte was skimming through the files, her intercom rang. "Hello, ma'am. A contractor named Mr. Henry is here from XYZ Company." Charlotte told the secretary to let Henry come into her office. Henry was 45 but looked energetic and full of life. As he entered the room, Charlotte greeted him with a smile. "Welcome, Mr. Henry. I have been waiting for you for quite some days." Henry greeted them and settled himself on the chair in front of her. As they talked about business affairs, Henry looked interested in her. Charlotte could also feel his gestures, but did not hurry to move things on. At the end of the meeting, they planned to meet the next day and settle the agreement terms of their contract. As Henry was about to leave, he asked Charlotte, "Why do you live alone? Why don't you get a partner?" Charlotte was not expecting this question. However, she cleared her throat and said, "I have not found the right person yet." To this, Henry chuckled softly and said, "Then I should consider myself a potential candidate to find a place in your heart." Without waiting for Charlotte to reply, he went away. The next day, Charlotte waited for Henry unconsciously. She liked his charismatic personality and could see a good business partnership with him. Henry arrived 10 minutes late from the scheduled time. This was his trick to further lure Charlotte into his spell, which worked quite well. Charlotte asked her secretary whether Henry had arrived yet thrice. As soon as he arrived, he presented his business terms and conditions, which Charlotte signed immediately without giving due attention to the details. As per hopes of Charlotte, Henry asked him out to dine together that night, and Charlotte accepted this offer willingly. It was not a usual business meeting because Charlotte sensed something interpersonal in Henry's attitude. That night, Charlotte dressed elegantly and she looked graceful. Likewise, Henry was looking presentable. They both spent many hours together. During their meetup, Charlotte asked Henry about his family. He lied to her. He told her he separated from his wife about 6 months ago and is now looking for a life partner. Charlotte wanted to know the reason behind the divorce, but changed the topic. He switched their conversation to business and other things. Charlotte was satisfied with Henry's answers, and she was planning to accept his proposal soon. Henry and Charlotte began to meet frequently, but Charlotte would pay the bills and manage their luxurious trips. A few times, Henry asked her for some financial favors on the pretext of having hard times in business, and Charlotte helped her instantly all the time. Henry retained an upper hand over Charlotte in all meetups and used his masculinity to keep Charlotte under control. Charlotte was not suspicious of Henry, despite seeing most things going against her. As Charlotte's past relationship was mostly violent, she appreciated Henry for not being violent, but Henry did more harm to her by staying exploitative and manipulative. One day, Henry's phone was curiously switched off for 12 hours. When he was finally reachable, he told her he was away on a business trip and would return in a week. Henry ghosted her for the entire week because he was on a family trip with his wife and 3 grown-up kids. Charlotte was not the first woman he played with. Instead, it was Henry's hobby to lure beautiful women into his love trap and then receive favors from them. Charlotte was not naive, but her feelings blinded her. After passing through a past traumatic relationship, she hoped to see something good with her new relationship. Financially, she was stable, but her emotional baggage cost her a lot. She was falling into yet another emotional trap in the quest to find peace and stability of a healthy relationship. Charlotte passed that week under great stress. She could not concentrate on her work, and her physical health deteriorated. When Henry finally contacted her the following Monday, he urged her to meet him at his office. When she went there, she could see eyes staring at her suspiciously. She asked Henry, "Why is your staff staring at me?" He leaned forward on the table and told her they doubted him for having an affair with her. She exclaimed in shock, "So you aren't in a relationship with me?" Henry justified himself. I am, but I cannot tell everyone. I have a family." Within a second, he spoke the truth himself. Charlotte was left speechless. She had just begun to believe in the beauty of relationships again when Henry took away trust from her. She, however, remained composed and asked him, "So who is your family?" I remember you told me you are single and you have no family. Henry pleaded, "If I had told you that I am married, you would never agree to develop a relationship with me." Charlotte rose from her seat and rushed out of his office. She came back to her office and canceled her business contract with Henry. He called her several times, but to no avail. His texts and calls fell on dumb ears. When his requests did not work, he resorted to threats and abuses. But Charlotte had already experienced toxic relationships, so none of this intimidated her. She took some time off from her business and took a short vacation in another city. Sitting in a cafe, she saw Henry with his wife and 3 kids. They looked like a happy family. Although Henry had ditched her, she did not want to ruin his comfortable life. She had a great chance to humiliate and disturb his life, but she chose not to do so. Her intuition told her that the time was not right to do so because he had no proof to explain to his wife their relationship. She returned earlier from the trip and spent the rest of her days at home. Henry contacted him again, and this time with a legal notice. He was trying to persuade Charlotte to carry on their affair under the table. Still, Charlotte was persistent in not wanting a relationship that looked more like a hidden activity. When she finally rejoined her office, Henry was waiting for her in her office. Till now, Henry believed that she did not know that he had kids, so he set another trap. "See, I know I lied to you. I should have told you I am married, but I didn't. I want kids. That is why I want to marry again." Charlotte laughed at this trap because she had already seen his 3 kids with him and his wife. "So who was with you at Barcelona's cafe last Sunday? Were they your neighbor's kids?" Charlotte asked with crafted innocence. Henry now had no other option but to spill out the actual truth. "Your business is flourishing, so I need a partnership with you. I presume that being in a relationship will make business deals easier," Henry said in a reserved tone. Charlotte called in her guard and asked Henry to leave with a notice that he should never dare to break into her place again. Having kept herself quiet for so long, she was not in the mood to forgive Henry this time. She called in her lawyer and discussed her case with him. The next day, Henry was called before the judge as Charlotte had accused him of harassment and business theft. All the expensive gifts that Henry had lured Charlotte to give him were recovered, and Henry was fined for the case of harassment. Henry got paid back for what he invested in the relationship, and Charlotte luckily saved herself from another toxic cycle in her life. The drama was not over yet, as Henry's wife approached Charlotte and asked her about her relationship with him. Charlotte told him about her natural face, Henry. Henry's wife told her that Henry used to trap successful ladies in his relationship and then enjoyed the perks of their wealth, and he owned only a small business. Charlotte did not listen to her more and asked Henry's wife not to follow her again. She closed her chapter with Henry forever. Exposure to Henry's evil ways of doing things became public, significantly impacting his personality. He slowly alienated himself from the company of ladies and began spending more time with family. On the other hand, Charlotte was still looking for a good life partner. One day, a perfect match came for her. The man was of her age and genuinely single. She was ready to marry him, and on her wedding day she received an anonymous note. "Dear Charlotte, I know I cheated on you and lied to you, but I cannot agree more with the fact that you are a good woman. You had all the options to ruin my life, but you taught me only what I deserved. You told me the importance of family and the need for honesty in relationships. I hope you move towards a better life and wish you a happy wedding. May you both stay together and stay happily ever after." No name was at the end of the letter, but Charlotte knew that the sender certainly was Henry. She was happy that she was not wrong in someone's story. The marriage ceremony began, and everyone cheered up. On that day, no one was happier than Charlotte herself. Charlotte's marriage proved successful, and her dream of a happy family came true. Charlotte and her husband were a carbon copy of each other. Their compatibility made their relationship a healthy one. At that time, her ex-husband, who had abused her for 5 years, also contacted her and tried to set a trap of having her back. However, Charlotte's husband was so loving and caring that no negative influence could harm Charlotte. They merged their businesses, developed new hobbies, and began participating in community work. Their couple became one of the most famous in their town, mainly because of the love and support they both gave each other. Charlotte often reflected that the people who pass through the most challenging times deserve to see happiness and goodness one day. She remained stuck in an abusive relationship for 5 years. Afterward, another infatuation kept her lingering for a year, and only at 38 did she find her perfect match. She often said to her husband that finding beautiful things needs patience. Sitting beside her husband, she exclaimed with relief, "I wanted nothing more but this peace, and at last I have it." Her husband cuddled her, watching the sunset in the west. In the end, the beauty of a relationship is like a soft breeze that relaxes one's body and sets the soul free to enjoy the pleasures of life. Finding the perfect match is hard, but settling for less than perfect often makes a person suffer unjustly. Charlotte waited for years to eventually find the person with whom she could connect openly, but she had to overcome several hurdles to reach him. The breezy morning in Canada woke Max up from his regular, tiresome day. He rubbed his eyes, looking out the window through its broken barriers. The 17-year-old man made his bed, planning for the day in his mind. It was an everyday routine for him to go to the paper factory and get his bundle of newspapers delivered. He had a list of tasks to complete before the town even woke up. Having called ready with his everyday jersey and the same old pair of jeans, he stepped out the door. There was no man on the street, just his bicycle waiting for him to accompany it to every doorstep of the listed areas in his delivery list. He didn't have to look at it twice, as he already knew the addresses by heart. The air hit his freshly woken up face, so he pedaled the bicycle to the newspaper office. The bundle was already in the rack where the delivery boys could pick it from. He made his way with the rising sun, pedaling his way to each of the big houses. They were nothing like the tiny space he called home, which was just a rental apartment, the shabbiest of them all. His deceased parents had given him nothing, but a friend who did the generosity of letting him live on rent in one of his quarters. Delivering every newspaper in the rack, he had gotten done as the sun stood above his head by 6 a.m., like every other day. Only his side job was done. His career of working as a baker in the bakery had the whole day to go. He cycled down to the town square. The little old-style bakery, Toppings, stood in the middle of several other shops. Opening the door with his keys, he switched the lights on time and earlier than everyone else. Max always was. "Good morning, Toppings," he said, closing the door behind him. The tag of the bakery still showed closed to the outside. Wiping every table, sweeping every tile, and baking the essential first-hour needs, he finally turned the tag to open. In no time, people were marching in with breakfast orders. He slowly watched the seats get filled with young students and middle-aged people going to their offices. "Oh, Maxie, what would I do without you?" Camilla, the old lady in charge of the reception, walked inside it wearing her apron. Max smiled in relief. Now, his job was only to handle the baking of things. The smell of freshly baked bread and croissants brought the young boy a different sort of happiness. It was a sweet sense of comfort, as if the place was his natural home. Since he started working in this bakery as a young boy, only 15 years old, baking has been his art form. The activity that brought him absolute pleasure and peace started as a sweeper, but he learned how to bake from Robert, who generously passed on his skills to Max. His dream was to open a bakery of his own and keep his favorites and the best-made bakery delights in his bakery. For things from all over the world for his customers' taste buds, he was eager to learn more recipes that people from around the world enjoyed. It was not only a wish, but a dream for which he worked every day, which motivated him to wake up the earliest and work the hardest. Max took every tip as a saving, consuming and enjoying very little of what he earned. He rarely had any shopping desires. All that he made went into his savings for the startup of his dream business and necessary expenses. Every day, Camilla would give him $1 for working so hard with him, other than his pay. Each of those dollars had been saved and very well kept in his little bag that he hid in his apartment. He rode his bike back to his quarter. It had become nighttime all over the city. Turning the door lock, he pushed the key in. The resisting door allowed no opening motion. A frown appeared on Max's face as he tried to open it again, but to no avail. A minute later, the doorknob turned, and a man appeared inside his apartment. "Yes?" he questioned. Max frowned sternly. "What are you doing in my house, sir?" Max questioned, pushing the door open. He was furious at the man for having trespassed without his permission. "Your house? Are you the guy that hasn't paid the rent?" the tall, bulky man replied. "I've paid all rents. Get out of my house, sir," Max replied, not falling for anything the man said. He pushed the door further, and the man stopped with his single foot. "Mr. Shelby said he wanted to change tenants since you are not paying the rent duly," he explained. "He threw your stuff out and said I could live here now, so please do not disturb again," the man informed, pointing behind Max and slamming the door in his face. "What?" Max said, turning behind and seeing his things lying under the tree outside his house. He quickly went up to his bags lying on the street. Opening them, he had only one thing in mind. Where was the bag that had his savings? "Oh, no, 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 no!" He kept murmuring with tears in his eyes. Every penny of his savings was gone, and the little bag was lying empty. He sat on the street, leaning against the tree with his shoulder bag in his hand. Mr. Shelby was a big man. There was no way he could claim anything on him. All his thoughts felt blurry in his mind as tears dropped, reflecting his confusion. He did not know who to go to, but there was only one man to question, Mr. Shelby. Walking up to his porch, he knocked on the man's door, guilty of his agony. It was pretty late at night, although, against his mannerisms, Max found it all right to strike again on the lack of response. If he was to spend the night on the road, it was no problem for someone to have their sleep disturbed for a little while. "What is it, boy? Look at the time, will you?" The pale white man opened the door, tying the knot on his sleeping robe. "Sir, why did you throw me out? Where am I supposed to go?" he pleaded, hoping to receive some mercy from the fat man. I do not care. You are paying too less. I've given the place to a man that pays well," he roughly replied. "Without notice?" Max held his hands out helplessly. "I do what I like with my place," he scorned back. Max knew at that point there was no benefit in arguing with the old man. "Where is the money from this bag?" He came straight to the question he was concerned with. Don't you worry about that. It's in safe hands," he chuckled. Max could not believe it. After all his wealth, he was greedy enough to take the little savings of a poor orphan boy who saved it by eating less, spending less, and surviving on nothing but water and bread. "That's my money!" "Not anymore, it isn't. Now get out of my porch, will you? Don't come bugging me with any of your questions anymore." Mr. Shelby slammed the door in his face. His eyes had a million questions behind them, and the hands holding his bag were helpless at the situation. He turned around, looking for a bench he could spend his sleepless night on. The shivering cold welcomed him with open arms of a breeze. The night on the bench did more than one thing for him. It gave him the strength to fight more pain than he ever knew and more determination for his dreams. Mr. Shelby had only taken his money and his house because he was more powerful, prosperous, and not accountable. Max watched the stars all night, promising himself he would remain honest and generous, no matter how powerful and wealthy he was getting. Eventually, as the days passed, he got used to spending the night outside on the bench. The cold, too, failed to bother him in the quest. He would survive off of anything he could find to eat, and his job at the bakery still paid him enough, but he promised himself not to live on rent anymore. He would save that money and fulfill his dream. Every day and every weather, no matter how harsh or deadly, he would spend the nights of winter rains and hungry stomach outside. Mr. Walker had taken everything from him, but he failed to take away his determination. Saving all that he had, he decided not to wait any longer. The poor boy started selling bread on a stall he would bake in the bakery's ovens. He would invest whatever he had in the business instead of waiting for the savings to get bigger, meeting people of all kinds of greed, cruelty, and harshness. Sometimes kids would bully him and tear his stall away. He would change neighborhoods, selecting which one to stay in about how badly the people would treat a homeless man. Year after year, his little business grew by a few inches. Sometimes he would bake more and get a good sale. Sometimes the loss was written in his fate. For the first few years, getting his baked things to sell was the biggest challenge. Nobody was familiar with the taste of his stalls, and people avoided eating street food for hygiene. But he kept trying to get a good sale, saving anything extra he would make of his profit to open the bakery of his dreams. 10 years later, the well-dressed man got out of his car with the journalist and cameraman following him at every footstep. The cameras flashed as the journalist followed him for the documentary they were making on him. He looked at the bench under the tree. It was broad daylight, but memories of a cold night swept across his mind. Oh my God, was this the exact bench? The journalist quickly instructed his cameraman to take a shot of it. The journalist belonged to a business magazine. He covered great business people who started from significantly less and reached their dreams at best. Yes, the wealthy businessman replied. Being the owner of Canada's biggest bakery franchise today, what do you think when you see this bench, sir? The journalist questioned a question too heavy for the man to answer. It was the bench he had spent his homeless nights on that gave him refuge from the burden of anyone's favor. That I am proud of myself for not giving up, proud of myself for not turning greedy and cruel like the people that brought me down, now that I am in their place of being rich and wealthy. Is there any advice you would like to give the young generation watching this? I had nothing. Max was just another street boy. Today, I'm the tycoon Max Stewart because the street boy chose never to give up. I've worked day and night restlessly, eating nothing, sleeping much less, and saving up for my dreams. I started with a stall of bread, and now I own the most number of bakeries in the country, he went on. Be grateful for what you have, but never fail to strive for more is what I've learned and what I'd love to teach. He smiled, looking behind him at the door of Mr. Shelby's house that was rusty and abandoned today. He was happy that door was slammed on him that day. It taught him much more than success and his savings could have ever taught him. Mark Hughes has had a life-defining career as one of the best and top-serving Marines during his time in the department as a United States Marine officer. After returning from what would be his 17th tour with the Marines, he had been diagnosed with a partial brain tumor that had affected both his mental and physical ability. Hughes had been remanded at the Quantico base in South Virginia to be honorably discharged from the Marines. It was a tough pill for him to swallow because he had dedicated almost all his life to a reputable service of defending his beloved country on all fronts. Tears gathered at the corner of his eye as he received his letter from the commanding officer, shook hands, and made his way out of the office. There was loud applause from the comrades as he walked through the hallway and out of the Marine facility. He paused outside, looked back at the institute that built him into the man he now is, and had no regrets. A great man of honor, poise, and completeness. Hughes took a transport home to meet with his family, whom he rarely sees back in Tampa Bay, Florida. The joy was in his daughter's face as she saw her father returning from the tour in his uniforms after a long time. She screamed and jumped on him, calling out to her mother that her father had returned. The screams filled the air as his wife, Angela, grabbed him tightly and kissed him everywhere. It was a thing of joy for everyone, and there were smiles until he broke the news to them. He gave the envelope to his wife, and the smiles dampened, and the daughter joined in to read his discharge letter. The three of them held themselves around his family as they sobbed together. The brain tumor was still in its early stage, and he could only feel mild to no symptoms. It was said to be a pituitary tumor and would develop faster if he was subjected to the same amount of stress and mental fatigue. However, doctors had suggested that he could undergo surgery if he wanted, but the chances that it would be successful weren't guaranteed. This decision he wanted to make with his family. He felt already fulfilled as he would like to dedicate the rest of his life to the service of other young men who desired to take the same path as him in life. To go out there, wear the badge of honor, defend their country's perimeter, and do it with every pride and blood. Although his wife and daughter would try to deter him from doing this, he insisted that it was the path that would crown all his efforts and give him the kind of fulfillment he felt he deserved. Not knowing how long he had, or how much he could effect during the period that he had left, he thought that he was making the best decision for himself and pleaded with his family to understand that this choice was for him to make and for them to support him, making his last days count for everything. As you would understand, there were a lot of mixed feelings that came with this choice of his. His family would prefer to have him at home and have the best possible time they could with him while they still could. But they also had to understand him in some ways and allow him to have the peace he wanted from within. So Mark Hughes would seek clinical help and therapy to help him gain stability and maintain a healthy mind. This was simple to him going back, so starting the charity he wanted to lend himself unto. Without any doubt, as he returned to Quantico, he was accepted as part of the backroom staff to help the prospecting young officers progress enrollment into the United States Marines. This was, of course, after he had tendered his medical certification showing that he could play this role and had what it took to fit in. As you'd expect, many prospecting young men desired to wear the badge and defend the country, but as with everything that has to do with young adults, there is a big chance that many of them would fall off track. Hughes stood out in his work ethic and how he lent himself for the good of these young adults. Weaving together his experience, expertise, and dedication to the badge into one mold, he made a lot of them redefine themselves and the purpose for which they were in the Marine Academy. There were a few boys in training at the time. His issues weren't just the kind of the ordinary young person. It was aggravated. He didn't need the extra push or motivation. He was opposing the authorities, defying the laws. With his rage and energy, he was a hard one to miss. Hughes took to him more personally and tried to understand why someone with such potential and drive would have such a harsh side that would prevent him from achieving success at the academy. He could see more in him than anyone else. He was convinced he could help Brian find himself and apply his attributes to a better end. So he decided to take on this challenge. Even with his struggles, Hughes decided to have sessions with Brian, talking to him and trying to understand his psyche, the reasons behind his patterns of reactions, his utterances, and his silence. It was a revelation and a study process at the same time. Hughes was a man of firm frames that wouldn't soften his surfaces to accommodate any excesses. That was the kind of discipline that the Academy expected to be impacted these intending Marines. Still, Brian needed to be tuned through other channels. Hughes saw that his potential was too huge and could be a loss to the Academy and country by extension. He was a waste to himself, as Brian never truly understood what he carried. 2 months in this role, it looked like he was scratching the paint priming on the wall. Nothing had changed about Brian, but that couldn't be said about Hughes. The symptoms were becoming more pronounced, with him having seizures and sometimes losing sense of his limbs. Speaking and articulation problems were setting in too, and so was occasional memory loss. It was becoming more and more challenging to pick up after Brian, and the Academy commander had decided to expel him from the Academy. Hughes had to put a word in for Brian and try to buy him another chance. Patience was running out, even from the instructors and personnel. Brian's trials forced Hughes into basic research, and he began to understand specific characteristics exhibited by him. It turned out that Brian didn't have a father figure in his life while growing up, which forced him to make complex, irrational decisions at an early age, and he grew up with it. With this understanding came to refinance a subtler approach to helping Brian. Hughes began to make good progress, which was overwhelmingly great for him, as he finally felt he had injected some good into the world after such a long life at the feet of violence and extremism. It was clear to him that he was doing better than he's done all this year. Brian began applying himself extensively to his childhood dream of becoming a Marine. His potentials were now clearly laid for all to see. There wasn't a better second. Brian Walters was the best graduating cadet of the Academy and won the award for the most outstanding performance for an intending officer in the field and arm events. Everyone knew it was hugely born from Hugh's influence on him. Brian couldn't be more thankful and appreciated every bit of contribution Hugh submitted to make him a success at the academy and took him as the father figure he never had. This success added a lot to Hughes. He understood that he could be better off helping a person like this. That led him to reconsider his decision on the surgery, leading him back home. His family was always on the fairy's toes to receive him whenever he came. They welcomed him and showed him the inside. Now the sickness toll has taken its bites, and his family would agree with him to abide by the surgery, even if his chances weren't favorable. The day came, and he was escorted into the theater by his family, including Brian, who's taken him as his father. Thankfully, the operation was successful, but a few other health complications required him to receive a transfusion. Hugh's daughter, Sophie, was available and willing and was the only donor public, but tests wrote her off as she wasn't in the most delicate state of health to be a donor. Brian volunteers to be tested to see if he'd be a match, and luckily he was. The doctor hurried and progressed in the transfusion. After full recovery, the doctor invited Hughes to his office for a word before being discharged. After conducting the tests for Brian to be a donor, he revealed that he noticed an unbelievable match in their blood components and decided to do a DNA. It turned out positive. Brian is, after all, his son. This came as a big shock to both parties. It was unbelievable. Mark Hughes had to take a long, deep dive into retrospective thinking, and then he could connect the dots. It was one of the few times he was internally deployed to a remote station in Utah. He had a brief relationship with a woman of mixed race. He was withdrawn from the position unexpectedly to a more pressing front. He was involved with her, so it was the only possibility of having Brian. This recollection would tally with Brian's story because his mother was mixed and was married to Mr. Walters, hence his last name. What a way it was to meet his son he never knew existed. So many blessings came from a situation he thought would be his end. The surgery was successful, so he was no longer a tumor sufferer. He was now more exposed to factors of humanity and how he could better lend himself to the formation of better Marines, society, and the world at large. His family was a member larger, and Angela, his wife, and Sophie would welcome Brian into the fold. It's sometimes odd how nature chooses to push us, but if we allow ourselves to enjoy every scent of blossoming petals, we could be colored from our insides. After spending sufficient time with his family, Hughes ultimately returned to Quantico and continued to impact the lives of young, promising individuals who had raving desires to be Marines, and continues to live through his legacy.